To hunt or not to hunt, it's a controversial multi-million-dollar sport. Some argue trophy hunting is bad for endangered animals. Others say it contributes to conservation. Is it possible to strike a balance between the two? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zaidan. Unethical, cruel and barbaric. Those are just some of the words opponents of trophy hunting use to describe it. They argue the practice of hunting wild animals for trophies needs to be better regulated, with some going as far as calling for an end to it. But for proponents, it's seen as a way to conserve endangered species and avoid poaching and illegal hunting. Well, for the countries which allow trophy hunting, it's a source of much-needed income, generating tens of millions of dollars a year and providing jobs. But conservationists say the number of rhinos, elephants and lions in the wild have dropped to their lowest levels ever. That hunting, despite being legal, is only making the situation worse. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Famida Miller in South Africa.
Winter in South Africa brings with it the hunting season. We're at a private game reserve in the Mpumalanga province, home to thousands of wild animals. This local hunter and his team are on the lookout for their first kill.
Do you think this is the right place to start stalking? Do they normally occur, the blowbill abuse occur in this type of area?
See, because it's winter time now, there's a flat area when we go through this mountain,
It can take days to find the right animal.
Old bull.
That's an old matured bull,
And it's pretty fresh.
Yeah.
From the signs of it.
Yeah.
It is exhilarating. It's a challenge, walking up to the animal, stalking the animal, looking for the animal.
At this 3,300 hectare family-owned reserve, specific game is selected for hunting to keep the numbers down and maintain the ecological balance. For this 50-year veteran, hunting is also a way of life.
We stayed on the farm, and yes, it was just part of life. You know, the hunting scenario. We stayed on a farm where there was no meat available for us, and yes, we actually lived with the land.
His target finally in sight, he takes aim. More than 7,000 international hunters visited South Africa 2 years ago, more than half of them from the United States. The Professional Hunters Association of South Africa says they contributed millions to the economy. These lions are kept at a separate enclosure at the reserve for tourists and conservation. They're not hunted. But it's the killing of a famous lion in neighboring Zimbabwe that has caused controversy. Many conservationists say hunting is cruel, unethical, and threatens endangered species. Audrey Kitchoff says the hunt that killed Cecil the lion was illegal and did not follow strict regulations governing the industry.
To make important decisions about the future of Africa's wildlife, the future of the economic contribution of hunting, decisions regarding that cannot be based on emotions.
Zimbabwe's community-based wildlife conservation project, Campfire, believes human-wildlife contact should be managed.
There can be a balance between hunting and conservation. And from Campfire's experience, you cannot hunt unless you have made a direct contribution to the conservation of the species.
While the sport and passion for many continues to be legal, this time Ismail did not make a kill. Famida Miller, Al Jazeera, Mpumalanga.
So is trophy hunting then good or bad news? Let's put that question to our guests. In Harare, we have Chap Masterson, founder of the Zimbabwe Wildlife Veterinary Trust. And in Nairobi, joining us via Skype, Paula Kahumbu, the CEO of Wildlife Direct, a Kenyan conservation NGO. Welcome to you both. They say ladies first. I want to start with Paula. Is the killing of Cecil just an isolated incident that's being used now to tarnish what is a vital and otherwise safe industry?
Well, it's very unclear what exactly happened in the case of Cecil. I think that it definitely points to the need for investigations into what is happening in the hunting industry, not just in Zimbabwe, but also in South Africa, because what it has exposed is a global concern that hunting could be actually contributing to the decline of lions and many other species. But I think it also reveals that it's not just about hunting. It's about the role of hunting in conservation. And perhaps we need to relook and start considering the other alternatives that are used in other parts of the world as well.
Well, that's definitely a point I want to raise in the show, but let me continue with that thought, though, and turn to Chap and say, on the other hand, it could be argued that what happened over Cecil just shows, it highlights how easy it is to blur the line between legal and illegal hunting. And we know about this case because it was Cecil the lion, but how many other animals might have been killed that we don't even know about?
Firstly, I'd like to clarify that I'm a wildlife veterinarian. I have no vested interest in hunting, but as a conservationist in Zimbabwe, I believe that hunting is one of the only tools that we have available to us at present. We don't have an ecotourism industry to speak of that can compare with the likes of South Africa or Kenya, and we have to make the best with what we've got. I think that the case of Cecil, I'm surprised that it's taken this long to shine a spotlight on the less ethical side of hunting and those areas of the industry that certainly need to be fixed. If the allegations surrounding Cecil are true, this is but a tip of the iceberg in a broader malaise affecting the industry, but a malaise which the authorities of Zimbabwe and the industry players themselves have taken steps to put right. There was a comprehensive stakeholder workshop held between the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority and members of the hunting fraternity in Zimbabwe in June of this year, sometime before the Cecil case came to the attention of the world media. And in that forum, I believe that there was a lot of honest, open debate and admission of some of the key issues facing the industry and undermining the sustainability of the industry.
And you're confident that that's sufficient, Chap?
Two things. I'll just finish off on that, is that reform process I do believe in. I've been party to it, and I've seen the commitment from all stakeholders to really be aggressive in reforming the industry. Secondly, as the founder of the Wildlife and Livelihood Development Program, we work with communities to improve their community-led conservation practices. And the problem that we face in Zimbabwe is simple. It's a matter of facts and figures. At present, 50,000 square kilometers or 5 million hectares of wilderness is under the custodianship of communities and is preserved by virtue of revenue coming into the Campfire program. We all admit that there are deficiencies within that program, but to remove it would be to take away the incentive for those communities to preserve wildlife, preserve their habitats, and to seek other alternatives in which to earn themselves a living.
Got the point.
Namely through slash and burn agriculture and livestock production.
Let me bring in Paula, because I could see she was shaking her head. I think she wants to get involved in this discussion at this point. Go ahead, Paula. I think you don't entirely agree with that, given the look on your face.
Well, I think that Chap is very correct and honest in saying that the case of Cecil does reveal that this could be the tip of the iceberg. And I'm very surprised to hear that meetings were held earlier in the year. And despite those meetings, and despite the honest conversations and the agreement that there were problems in the industry, a hunting company hunted, or rather poached, a beloved lion called Cecil. It's not as if it was a mistake. They knew that it was the wrong lion. They found a radio collar. They tried to destroy it. They then still decapitated this lion and took its head to the taxidermist. They intended to export it. It's like they didn't even attempt to rectify, and they knew that they were going to get away with this. It's just by pure bad luck that radio collar was still revealing the location.
OK, Paula, if we can, I want you to focus on a point which Chap raised there, which is what alternative do countries like Zimbabwe, do areas which he deals with, what alternative do they have?
Well, first I'm going to say, perhaps in Zimbabwe today, given the situation of that country and all the other horrible things that are happening in Zimbabwe, they may not have many other alternatives. But when you look at hunting across the African continent, what's happening in Zimbabwe is a tiny, tiny fraction of what is happening. If you look at South Africa, that is where probably 90% of the hunting takes place in Africa. And it is not ethical and it is not conservation. It is canned There are puppy farms for lions where they are breeding these animals to release them into enclosures so that they can be hunted in order to guarantee that a hunter, a big person from the US or Europe who's paying tens of thousands of dollars can come and shoot that animal. That is not conservation. Those animals are not playing a role in the ecosystem. What's happening in Zimbabwe...
Paula, let me raise with you some of the stats which are put out by people who are supporters of legal hunting. They say, for example, look at Zambia. That tried to ban big cat trophy hunting in 2013, but had to reverse the decision in 2015 precisely because it needed money to fund conservation. Kenya's population, we're told by Mike Norton-Griffith, Kenya's population of large wild animals declined 60 to 70%, we're told, after Kenya banned all hunting in 1977. Is it sometimes counterproductive?
I do not rate Mike Norton-Griffiths. I'm very sorry. Mike Norton-Griffiths thinks that hunting is the panacea for conservation. I think he's wrong. I think that the world has come out very clearly by the uncovering of what happened to Cecil. It's broken hearts around the world. I think it's time human beings recognize that we're bigger than that. We don't need to be killing animals in order to justify keeping them alive.
But are his numbers wrong?
Kenya banned, can I finish? Kenya banned hunting in the 1970s because children protested on the streets of the city, of the capital city, Nairobi, and the president listened and hunting was banned. The reason why wildlife declined in Kenya has got nothing to do with hunting. It's to do with population growth, development, fragmentation of habitats, loss of forests, and those kinds of things. And today, many years after that decision was taken, twice as much land is now under conservation in Kenya, and it's not because of hunting. It's because communities are engaging in conservation, and communities have a real traditional, cultural, and spiritual connection to nature, to the land, and to the wildlife. And it's not that we have a solution that would work in Zimbabwe or other countries. In fact, what we see in Southern Africa, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Botswana and other countries is that the revenues are actually not really making it to the ground, to those communities. In fact, there is one report that shows that less than 3% of the tourism revenues coming into Africa is generated by hunting.
Okay, Paula, you're kind of shifting into another topic, which I do want to get into in a minute, but I just want to rewind back before we get into the discussion about how much money actually gets down to the grassroots. And I want to take some of the earlier points that you made there, the numbers, the claims made by supporters of hunting, that hunting is actually good for conservation. Paula has her doubts about that. Chap, I could see you shaking your head when she was expressing those doubts. Why?
Look, I think that there were some valuable points to come out of what Paula just said. But firstly, I'd like to just say on the matter of Cecil, we're not here to defend illegal activity on the part of anybody in the hunting industry. And I have some personal issues with the ethics behind that particular hunt. I don't believe that a bow, even if you do have a permit for a bow hunt, should be used after dark when you've got a chance of wounding an animal unless able to follow it up. I believe very strongly in that. But I would distance ourselves as an industry in Zimbabwe from any form of canned hunting. This is a practice that is common in South Africa. It is not something that we should be painted, have branded on us. As an industry, we are very distinct from what goes on in other countries, even our close neighbours.
Are you
moving
too
on to
distinct
the issue
and too
of funding of conservation?
To offer a real example of how good hunting can be for conservation? Do you have a really particular set of circumstances in Zimbabwe? I think was the point Paula was trying to make, that you can't really generalise.
In Zimbabwe, the emphasis is on large, free-ranging wildlife populations and large ecosystems spanning broad landscapes, which is very different from the very commercialised small block farming, wildlife farming and ranching in South Africa. Secondly, you were talking about the community benefit. We all know that that there are problems in certain areas where communities are failing to get the equitable distribution of benefits accruing from their wildlife resource. But it is not something that we should throw out. We shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We should be looking at ways of improving that regulation and improving that equitable distribution, as well as diversification of revenue streams coming out of natural resources through sustainable means.
Okay.
Going back to first principles, go ahead.
All right, I was going to say, on that point which you've raised there, talking about whether we should throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to the potential benefits to communities. Well, one person I spoke to, Emmanuel Fundira, the director of the Safari Operators Association of Zimbabwe, told me all of the benefits he thinks that hunting brings to local communities. Let's listen into what he had to say to me.
Hunting is very, very important in our context, in that it supports close to 800,000 families directly in terms of provision of infrastructure, building of roads, hospitals, education, schooling for the kids, and sanitation. So we consider hunting as part of tourism, which contributes directly to the livelihood of those families here in Zimbabwe. So it is significant and important.
Paula, I'm curious, how do you respond to that? If you listen to Emmanuel there, 800,000 families, he says, rely on the hunting industry.
First, there is very little transparency in the hunting fraternity and in the hunting industry. And we have never seen any facts to back up what he's saying. Now, I'm not saying he's lying, but I'm just saying that it hasn't been really documented very well. Obviously, in some very isolated cases, hunting has become the way that revenues can be generated. But I don't think it's the only solution, and I think it's a mistake to treat it as the only solution. Zimbabwe has this way of thinking that if it pays, it stays. And therefore, wildlife has to pay for its existence. And I find this a really troubling thought in this day and age. Human beings are far more sophisticated in their thinking about wildlife. We would never say that about the Eiffel Tower or the Statue of Liberty. We'd never say, so long as it's not making money, there's no point in keeping it going. Let's break it down and let's turn it into bricks and build something else. This is heritage. This wildlife is heritage. It is not just African heritage. It is global heritage. And we can't afford to be brutal and savage about how we treat it, that we allow people from very far away who have no connection to Africa other than a thrill of killing an animal to come and spend a lot of money to kill those animals. I think
Paula, as we heard from Emmanuel, there are people apparently on the ground in Africa who do want people to come from far away and hunt animals, though.
Yes, but I don't think they've been given options. I mean, what Chad said earlier is that in Zimbabwe today, they don't have that many options. And that's really unfortunate. And that's got a lot to do with the political situation in Zimbabwe, which is not his fault. It's the fault of, the overall situation in that country. In Kenya, we do have other options. And in other countries, you go to Canada, go to the United States, go to Britain. In England, they use the national lottery to raise money to support their protected areas. Okay. They don't say, well, you've got to kill these animals if you want to keep these conservation areas going.
All right. Well, since we're talking about the business side of this, let's run through some of the numbers involved in the big business side of hunting. Prices vary across Africa. Hippos were the cheapest of the big five. Trophy fees alone came in at just under $10,000. A lion went up to around $25,000, while the most expensive, an elephant, came in at around $42,000. Like I said, that's just the trophy fees. The price of a 2-week package could rise to tens of thousands of dollars more. Now, chap, when you look at numbers like that, it does sound like a lot of money coming in to the country because of hunting. But the figure which Paula mentioned, which is often repeated by opponents to hunting, say, actually, it's only 3 to 5% that actually trickles down to local communities. How do you respond to that?
Look, I think that any money that's trickling down is enormously better than what they've got at the moment. Most of these families are dealing with less than $1 a day, surviving or struggling to survive on less than $1 a day. I think that we're arguing at cross purposes to some extent. The fact of the matter is that safari hunting is an effective conservation tool if managed correctly, as so graphically illustrated in Europe and North America, in which the industry is worth billions. So to argue that it is some way inherently undermining to conservation is ridiculous. Closer to home, 90% of Zimbabwe's rhino population currently reside on 3 private conservancies. And those 3 populations of black rhino are 3 of the key 1 IUCN populations in Africa. Key 1 population is a population of international significance. It is critical to the survival of the species, not only in Zimbabwe but worldwide. And those conservancies survive almost entirely on the revenues generated from well-regulated, well-managed safari hunting. We're not saying that the industry itself is perfect, and there's a lot of room for improvement, and a lot of regulation needs to be jacked up. But the industry itself is not, or the concept of hunting itself is not the problem. If we did away with it, and if we forsook the revenue that we're currently generating out of these areas, people would encroach upon wild lands, as simple as that, both in the communal areas as well as some of the state-protected areas. And the damage inflicted on wildlife and wildlife populations and habitats and wilderness would far outweigh any impact that a well-regulated trophy hunting industry would have.
Okay.
In fact, in the past, the campfire program in its heyday was a clear demonstration of a situation in which we almost doubled the effective conservation land in this country in the matter of a decade and a half. And that was just through a simple stroke of a pen, devolving user rights to the custodians, the communities that live with wildlife. And I believe that it is up to them, as the people that live alongside these animals and who have to put up with the very real costs of coexisting with crop-raiding elephant or livestock, marauding lions, to sustainably manage those populations for their own benefit. And it's for them to decide it, and for us to help. And the international community should help that process, rather than criticizing it and undermining that motivation.
All right, I want to shift gears a little bit. It's kind of related to what Chap is mentioning there, but Paul, I'm wondering, do we have any examples where people have moved, countries have moved from hunting to other forms of ecotourism, but at the same time they've had a plan where they can deal with some of the concerns that Chap has raised there? How do you provide for people who will be left? People, even if they're receiving only the 3 to 5%, there are people who are going to be left behind. How do you deal with the needs of other communities who actually rely on hunting as a form of control of wild animals encroaching upon their farms and so on and so forth?
You know, it has to be part of the whole integrated development plan of a country. In Kenya, for example, we've just passed new legislation for wildlife. And as I said earlier, we had banned hunting in the 1970s. And until recently, we had bird shooting, which was a form of revenue generation for some communities. Now, when it came to discussing and putting together the ideas for the new legislation, communities actually said very clearly, we don't want bird shooting either. We don't want any killing of animals, in fact. And the new law was passed without any form of hunting or killing whatsoever. I think it's really interesting. So what people said is what matters to us more than anything is our traditional culture, our land rights, our ability to participate in the decision making, and our ability to generate revenues through non-consumptive use. So they do have ecotourism and various other forms of utilization, whether it's photographic safaris and those kinds of things.
I can see it. Chap's shaking his head. I want to give you 10 seconds, Chap, because we're going to have to end the show. 10 seconds, Chap.
I think that's great in a country like Kenya that is generating $1 billion out of ecotourism. We don't have that luxury.
All right.
They also have a significant donor contribution, which we don't have.
Got it. All right.
At the moment.
It's all right. We're going to have to leave it there.
We can't artificially support these populations.
We will discuss this, I'm sure, again in the future. For now, let's thank our guests. From Harare, Chap Masterson, founder of the Zimbabwe Wildlife Veterinary Trust, and from Nairobi, Paula Kahumbu, CEO of Wildlife Direct. And thanks for watching. We do like to hear from you too. You can contact us by going to our programme page at aljazeera.com, or you can post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zaidan, and the whole team, for now, it's goodbye.